Welcome everyone to our first workshop session for the Finding Fearless community. It's January. I'm so excited to have everyone here. More than anything, I woke up like a giddy little kid because I was so ready to learn everything Brooke has to offer us today. I was, at home yesterday with both of my kids, navigating this kind of, COVID flexibility life that we've all been having to do. And I was like, yeah, I could use some restoration in my life this week. So I just want to first thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Brooke, for the time today. But go ahead. I'm going to let you take the keys to the kingdom. So
okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, first, I just want to thank you all for joining and for the opportunity to meet with you today. This is a passion of mine, so it's actually a real honor and joy for me to be able to share with you. And my hope is that you'll take away some really practical things to be able to apply right away to your life, as well as maybe a deeper understanding of why restorative practices are so important to many aspects of our lives. So let's get started. So to start with, I thought we'd just do a check-in from the very beginning. So what I'd like you to do, if it feels comfortable where you are, is either to close your eyes gently or just lower your gaze so that you can kind of go inward and that you're not distracted. And I'm just going to ask you a few questions that I want you to check in with yourself around. So the first one is easy. How are you feeling right now? And I want you now to check in with the different aspects of your being. So first, your mind. What are the thoughts you notice? You're having a lot of thoughts. After you check in with your mind, check in with your body. How does your body feel? Is it relaxed? Is it tense? Do you notice any place in particular that's drawing your attention? Just try to notice without judgment. Can you notice the coolness of your breath, or perhaps maybe just even tightness in your back, or maybe just even noticing your feet on the floor? The next, I want you to just notice your heart. So what I mean by that is, what emotion is present for you right now? Are you feeling stressed or peaceful, excited? Just notice. And last, I'm going to ask you to check in with your spirit or soul. So what I mean by that is, even if you don't have a religious practice, that could just mean your values, or what's calling you today, what's your focus. So check in with, what's the value that I'm focusing on today, something that I'm putting myself into. So once you finish that, you can open your eyes, and there's a poll here, and you can just check in and highlight, how you feel 1 to 10 on fired up, ready to go. 1 is drained. And then the second part of this, after you've answered that and submitted, is I just want to see and know, and if you don't have a piece of paper with you or a pad of paper or someplace you can write down, I'm going to invite you to do that right now. Grab something, because throughout our time together, you might want to take notes, but also you might want to write things down, and I'm going to ask you to write things down at some points. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to write down is maybe jot down whatever you noticed: mind, body, spirit, your heart. If there's anything that stood out for you, maybe I noticed I had back pain, or I noticed my stomach was kind of calling my attention, or maybe you noticed I feel kind of heavy and sad in my emotions. So if that's the case, just write down the things you noticed. And remember, as a check-in, we did different aspects of our being: mind, body, heart, soul, or spirit. And then let's see what you guys said. So most of you said you were a 9, which was fired up. So that's pretty good. I'm glad. Or 8, sorry, you were an 8. So the second question I want to check in with you about is, do you struggle with perfectionism? Now, that might not seem connected, but I'm going to talk about this throughout our time together and how it actually relates to perfectionism. So on the notes that relates to restorative practices. So on the notes that you're taking, just write down perfectionism, yes or no. And if it's a yes, when do you notice it? And then, do you think it serves you or not? And how? So I'll just give you a few minutes to just write those things down as well. And they can be 1-word answers. You don't have to have them long answers, but just kind of make a note of that for yourself at the beginning, because we'll check back in at the end. Okay, so while you're just maybe finishing your thoughts there, I'm just going to go on to a slide that I think is pretty funny. It's a cartoon, and it's the brain, the heart and the brain. And the brain says, "Heart, what happened?" And the heart says, "I watched the news." So I think this is accurate for the last couple of years we've been going through, but for life in general. And as a larger note, what I love about this particular cartoon is it's an invitation for us to realize that there are different aspects of our being. Yes, our intellectual need to have information, to be informed, to stay engaged, but our heart also has needs. Our emotional self has needs. And we need to always be attuned to both and not prioritize one over the other. And it's very necessary. And as we go through our talk today, I'll talk about why sometimes we feel like this incessant need to always be connected or always be watching the news, and how it's hard to kind of unplug, but why it's so important to create that balance and attunement to the different aspects of who we are. So I have another quick poll for you guys. This one is, which of the following areas are most impacted by our well-being of our relationships? So there's a couple options for you here. There's gut function, stress levels, coronary arteries, insulin regulation, immune system, answers B and E only, or all of the above. So I'm asking you to just pick which one you think is most accurate for which aspects affect our physical health in regards to the well-being of our relationships. So go ahead and key in your answer, because we're going to be touching on that in terms of restorative practices and how it affects different areas of our life. Okay, so hopefully you've submitted your answer. Let's see, all the above. Good, you guys are a very smart group. Yes, so it's really important for us when we're talking about restorative practices to think about our relationship not just to ourselves, but to other people. And our physical health is actually directly impacted by the quality of the relationship we have with ourselves and then with other people. So I'm going to do a little bit of how stress impacts our body. So some of this might be review for you, but the reason I think it's important, especially considering, as Madeline said at the beginning, these unusual times we're living through with the stress of COVID and everything that's happening, is there's something called an allostatic load. So what that means is stress in general is not all bad for our bodies. We need a little bit of stress to get motivated, to have goals, to function. But when there's too much stress and it's ongoing and it becomes chronic and it exceeds our capacity to restore ourselves, that's what's called the allostatic load, which becomes chronic stress. And when we have chronic stress, it actually impacts all areas of our body. So our brain, this includes concentration, it can cause anxiety, depression, irritable mood, mind fog, our cardiovascular health, our joints and muscles, it causes inflammation in the body. Also immune response, so something that's really important to everyone all the time, but especially recently, your immune response will go down if you're not doing restorative practices to manage stress. Your skin, it can affect your gut. So the other part that I want to mention here, and is a whole other side conversation, but the gut is actually a huge place where the neurochemicals for happiness, like dopamine and serotonin, are actually produced. We oftentimes think it's produced mostly in the brain, but they're actually really produced in the gut. So our gut health and the stress and the impact on our gut health is actually directly tied to restoration for us mentally and physically. Something to think about. And if you want more information, you're welcome to contact me afterward. That's a whole side topic. And then reproductive symptoms. It can make our PMS symptoms worse if you're a man, or a woman, sorry, if you're a man. There are also ways that this can impact you on your hormone production, sex drive. So it really does impact all areas of our body. So specifically around COVID, something that I really want to highlight here is, why do we feel this way? And even more so over the last year and a half or so. So our brains are actually made to categorize everything as threat or reward. You can think of it as safe or unsafe. So you might not know this, or you might, but every 5 seconds, your brain outside of your awareness is scanning the environment for safe or unsafe. It's happening all the time, every 5 seconds. And unconsciously, we're making somewhere around 2,000 decisions a day. Most of these are habitual. So why does that matter? Because when our brains detect a threat, even if it's an invisible threat, right, like a virus that we can't see, it's constantly thinking threat, what's a threat, what's a threat, right? And we've had heightened amounts of that recently. That's important because what it's doing is sending our nervous system into a fight, flight, freeze response, which is something you've probably heard of before, which just means we're kind of in a heightened state of alert. And the bodies were made to function in that way to get us away from danger. But when we can't actually get away from the danger, it just means that that continues to build up. That's the allostatic load I was talking about in your body. And without proper restorative practices that we're going to talk about later in the presentation, that actually directly impacts your health. So why is this important too? If you're business leaders or people that run your own business, or maybe you're a mom or a family member who has lots going on, is when we're in a fight, flight, freeze response, it actually shuts down our problem solving abilities in the higher functioning frontal cortex of the brain. It makes it harder for us to do complex problem solving. It's more like reactive. So we don't have the space and capacity to sit with something long enough to create more opportunities to think about what other avenues do I have. It's like really like get away from the tiger, right? Think about it like that, right? You're not going to sit there and be like, how many options do I have to get away from the tiger? You're going to think I'm going to run, right? So in our modern lives, maybe you're not being faced with a tiger, but maybe you're being faced with a fear that still feels life threatening, even if it's just an emotional attack, right? So it cuts down our wider perception. It actually changes the way we view our world, changes the way we actually see things. It cuts down on our creativity, our cognitive ability. And this is really important if you're someone that leads a team or you lead a family. It makes it more difficult to be collaborative. Think of it this way. If you're scared, are you thinking, I want to like hang out with everyone and connect? No, you're probably thinking, I want to protect myself or protect those that are closest to me. And you kind of start to shut down and get kind of more focused on what's close. So those things are really important. The other part is just to validate you. If you're feeling tired, if you're feeling like I'm done, I was done like when it started, like now I'm really done, you're not alone. Think about how much your brain has been doing. So that kind of fatigue you feel, the brain fog, it's normal and okay if you're feeling like, I just want to check out, this is too much. And I'm hoping that some of what we cover today will give you really easy, specific things that you can start to put into place to try to fill up your tank again. So before we move on totally, I want to make into the restorative practices, which will be a majority of what we cover today. I want to just talk a little bit about technology and our stress loads. So all of us are working from home, or at least most of us are. I think all the healthcare workers that aren't, and I have many clients that aren't that I work with. But for technology, actually a study was just done and published and put out that people are actually working longer hours now that they're working from home. And we don't have what's really important is the transitional time that a lot of people used to have for commuting, which was quiet time where they could be in their car or just kind of not think about anything, that kind of decompressed period that people had. So if you don't already have that baked into your day or find little moments to do that, that's one of the first things I'm going to say is to think about that. Some big companies, tech companies, have actually started implementing that as an option for people to just hit a commute button that pops up for them and all the windows of people that they have meetings with, that just is like a fake, I'm commuting, so people know, give them that half an hour to be able, or 10 minutes or whatever you can take to kind of just get in the zone, or just close your eyes, focus, get centered before you start your day. The other part that I wanted to mention around technology and our stress loads, especially during the last year and a half or so, is we weren't made to communicate in like little boxes. I mean, I'm so grateful I can connect with all of you and grateful for technology. And this isn't a technology bashing moment. This is just a balancing moment. But when we don't see a whole person, I just see your beautiful little faces over here. We actually have to work harder to try to make meaning and understand what's happening, because most of the communication that we experience in our everyday life is actually through the body. Very little is what we say. Most of it is what is perceived through the body. So when we get a truncated version of someone, it actually makes us work harder to try to figure out what's actually happening. How am I feeling? It makes it harder for us to actually feel connected. So connection is one of the ways we restore ourselves. So if you've been like spending all this time on Zoom and with people, but I'm more drained than ever, that's probably one of the reasons why, is it's not actually fully restoring you. The other part is that I just like to mention, something maybe you've thought about already, but maybe you haven't. So sometimes I just like to make it more explicit, is that with instantaneous communication that we all experience, we have internalized a sense of, if it comes in, I have to answer it right away. It's expected because people know that I got it. They know it came in. It wasn't like a telegram that people are like, oh, it takes months for that to get there. So I'm not expecting an answer for months, right? It's like, no, if my phone beeps, oh my gosh, what if it's something urgent, right? Very natural response. But every time that happens, when we have that kind of jerk, oh my gosh, I have to respond right away without the pause, we're actually creating that fight, flight, freeze, stress response. So one of the things I want to invite you to do is just be mindful of how you feel when your phone beeps, how you feel when the phone rings and you have a call. Just start to notice, oh my gosh, am I stressed? Am I calm? Do I need to take a minute? Just notice. And then also notice how good am I at like actually turning my phone off? having moments where I unplug. And we'll get a little bit into that as we move into the restorative practices. But, do I create moments of no screen time, especially when you are starting to go for bed? The research shows up to an hour before bed, they suggest no screen time. So if you're having problems with sleep, which is one of the things stress will absolutely interrupt if you're not sleeping well, one of the best things you can do for yourself is at least an hour before bedtime, no phone, no TV, no tablets, create a ritual and structure around really nurturing the body and trying to help yourself unwind at the end of the day. This is also really important for kids, if you have kids, to try to help them have moments with no screens. I know kids are on the computers all day now, a lot of them having to do school that way. So creating moments outside of that where they also can do some of these restorative practices with you can be very helpful. I wanted to make a note on burnout before we actually dive into the practices. So burnout is actually this idea that we're talking about of the allostatic load building up. And what actually happens, so I said the tiger, right? In the old version, it was the tiger's there and run from the tiger. But now the version might be you're driving and someone cuts you off and, you culturally suppress your desire to like hit your horn and maybe do things that aren't very appropriate. Or, you get an email from a coworker that really annoys you and you'd like to send a version that's basically like, all caps, all kinds of stuff, but you suppress it and think of your better nature and send a nice diplomatic email back, right? Or your kids do something that's really annoying. Kids are beautiful and wonderful, but they're also little humans that are learning how to like be fully grown, self-regulating humans, right? So maybe they do something that triggers you and you really want to yell, but you are a good parent, so you hold it back, right? But all of those little things are good. I'm not saying yell at your kids or your boss or people in traffic, but what happens if we don't have restorative practices is all of those moments where we were triggered that got suppressed, if we don't find moments in the day to unload that, they build up. And that's actually what has been shown to cause burnout. So these restorative practices, what I'm going to suggest, are not to be done once a month or just when you remember. I'm going to encourage you to find ways, and I'm going to teach you how to do this, to include them in your everyday life. Because we want to be able to dissipate that level of stress over time, right? So that we don't have burnout. And one of the reasons I put here this perfectionism question, and maybe check in with yourself what you wrote down, is there's healthy perfectionism and then there's maladaptive perfectionism. And I'll continue to talk about that later. But all I mean by that is, some healthy perfectionism, and maybe perfectionism isn't even the best word, but goal-oriented, wanting to give your best, wanting to be focused and fulfilled. Those are good. Those aren't bad qualities. Maladaptive is, if I'm not good enough. If I'm not perfect, I don't have permission to actually show up. If I'm not perfect, I'm not lovable. Or it's such a high level of stress around everything that you're doing that you have noticed there's no more joy in it. That what you're doing all of a sudden is totally vacant of joy and disconnected from a sense of life, right? Like work can be hard, but it shouldn't be draining. We should find the balance between the stuff that actually makes us feel like we have no energy and the things that maybe we feel like we worked really hard that day, but we feel fulfilled, right? And that's not to say we do it perfectly. I always say, I'm not here to give arrival lessons. We're all still learning and growing. And if somebody does try to give you arrival lessons, you should leave because no one's arrived. We're all practicing. But something to think about in terms of burnout and restorative practices. Okay, so I love this quote. It's a Tanzanian proverb. It says, little by little, a little becomes a lot. So why I wanted to include this was because just as I've been talking about the buildup of stress, little by little becomes chronic stress or chronic burnout. The same is true for the restorative practices we're now going to transition to talk about. Little by little, a little becomes a lot. And so finding little moments throughout your day repeatedly over and over to check in with yourself, to nurture yourself, is actually what's going to help fill your cup. And the goal is to fill your cup so that you can pour into other people's life, be it your family, your coworkers, your community, the people you care about. So for example, a story I often hear when I'm working one-on-one with clients or with companies that comes up a lot, and you might recognize this in yourself, is, well, it's selfish to take time for myself, or I just don't have the time and it would be selfish to take time away from the other things. But the truth is, if you don't take care of yourself, you'll not have anything else to give. And we really need to work on sustainable rhythms in our life, right? That has to be a value of ours. And part of sustainable rhythms is realizing that you do deserve to take moments, and even if they're small moments, they can be powerful. And I'll share with you some of the research later that says even a minute here or there of a specific breathing technique I'm going to teach you can help pull the cortisol out of the bloodstream. So a minute, we can all find a minute, right? That's like saying to someone, I have to go to the bathroom. You don't really have to go, you just go there to breathe. Like, you know, we can find a minute. So that's my goal, is to give you things that are actually things you can include. So one more poll here that I think is really interesting and powerful. So there's a recent research from Harvard that says this at chronic levels is similar to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So there are your options: stress, grief, loneliness, or anger. So I'd love you to just pop in whichever answer you think it is. And then once you maybe have another moment, we'll get the answer to see what you guys thought. Stress. Okay, so you're not altogether wrong, but this is one of the things that I love about this question. The real answer for this specific research was loneliness. So the reason why I wanted to point out loneliness being so impactful is we are in a time where, yes, because of what we've been going through as a culture, we're disconnected from people. But additionally, our technology, to go back to that, makes us feel connected to people, but it actually isn't deeply always authentic, pure, honest connection. Sometimes it's feeling like comparison more than connection, right? Or sometimes technology has different things. So loneliness is actually the answer. That's equal. Chronic levels of loneliness is the same as 15 cigarettes a day. So when we go into restorative stress, restorative practices now, this is one that I want to talk about. We're going to start with social rest. So the first one here is think about how much quality time you're getting with people that love you and fill you up. So these are the 7 types of restorative rest I want to introduce to you. And then we'll also continue on with other things. But social rest. So this means I want you to write these down, and next to each one, I want you to write down either, yes, I'm doing well, or not, and then also an idea of how you think you could do better. So let's start with social rest. You might be around a lot of people all day long or in meetings all day long, but you might not feel restored, right? We just talked about loneliness. You might still feel kind of lonely or empty. So I want you to write down next to social rest, either one person you could connect with that really fills you up, one thing you could do that would make you feel really connected, either to your family, to yourself, or to a loved one. Because the research shows repeatedly that that connection as part of social rest is very important for not just our mental health, but our physical health. So I'll give you a moment to just write that. The second is physical rest. So physical rest can be active or passive. So what I mean by that is physical rest can be napping. I want you to write down next to physical rest for yourself, either ways that you are doing it that you want to continue, or one new idea. So what I mean by that is you could do yoga, massage, napping. Those are kind of more passive, or active. We also need active physical rest. You know, getting outside for a walk, getting our blood circulation moving, doing even gentle, workouts can be really helpful. So on physical rest, I want you to just check in with yourself. How am I doing? What could I do better? Or what could I try today to add to that might be good for me? Maybe you write down today I need a nap, or maybe you write down today I need to do some stretching. I need to move my body. The next is mental rest. So mental rest is, think of it this way, maybe you have a very busy day, you got 8 hours of sleep, but you're still feeling totally drained and your mind is spinning. So mental rest is our capacity to actually step away from things and give our minds a moment. So things you can try if you're noticing, again, I want you to write down mental rest and then how you're doing on it next to it. Here are some ideas. If you're noticing that mental rest is a problem for you, some very simple ideas are schedule, like on your calendar when you have all your meetings, put in there, every once in a while, stand up from my desk, turn everything off, close my eyes for 1 minute, try to clear my thoughts. Or they call it a brain dump. Before you go to bed at night, keep a pad of paper by your bed, and just anything that's still circulating in your head at the end of the day and you're having a hard time kind of getting it to stop, they call it a brain dump. Just write down. It doesn't have to be full sentences. It can just be jotted ideas, everything that's still going on. So those are a couple of options, but there's lots of options you could do, but just think about it as your mental rest. Sensory rest. Okay. So this is actually our capacity to step away. So think about the last time you actually had everything off, music, phone, TV, everything and you closed your eyes and you just sat in silence. Now, silence is really restorative. It also can be uncomfortable for people if you haven't spent time in silence. That's when, things we're not paying attention to can come up. I've done extended silent retreats in my life, many of them, and they are incredibly restorative. But the first couple of days are like being on a boat in the rocky waters. You're definitely going to notice anything that you haven't been paying attention to. So I first want to validate and honor that for people, that sometimes being in silence can feel scary or overwhelming. But I also want to encourage you that it's very important to give ourselves moments. And it can be as little as 30 seconds if you need it to start that minute, but just closing your eyes in the middle of the day and letting yourself rest for a moment. Creative rest. So you might say to me, I'm not very creative, right? I don't have anything creative, but I would challenge you, because creativity can really be anything. It can be poetry, it can be cooking, it can be gardening, but this is one of the kinds of rest that we actually need. So as you're writing these down, creative rest, I want you to kind of put next to it, how are you doing with creative rest? What's one thing you could do or add? So, it could be coloring, it could be painting, it could be really anything you can think of. And then emotional rest. So emotional rest is you actually checking in with yourself, being able to authentically answer, how am I today, right? Sometimes we're so focused on everyone else's needs that if someone asked, how are you? We might just say, oh, I'm fine, and keep it moving. But emotional rest is actually the capacity to really know, this is how I'm doing today. I actually asked myself. I actually gave myself enough space to actually hear what my heart needed to say. And having safe people in your life that you can do that, right? Not everyone earns that level of trust, but knowing who those people are and really understanding that when something comes up, you go to those people. And also paying attention to the people that drain you and minimizing the amount of time you have to be around them. That's another part of social rest, right? The other part that's really important that I want to mention around social rest is people pleasing. So if you have a hard time saying no, or if you have perfectionistic qualities, which is I have to be everything to everyone in order to be loved and acceptable, emotional rest is the ability to say no. So just check in with yourself. How good am I at saying no? Is that something I'm still working on? It's okay if it is. Something I like to tell people is no is a complete sentence. So you don't need to explain yourself. That's really uncomfortable for people. Sometimes it was for me to get to that place, still is sometimes. But the ability to just realize like, oh, I can have boundaries. It's okay for me. Okay, those are all parts of emotional rest. And then last, spiritual rest. So as I said at the very front, spiritual doesn't have to mean that you belong to a religion. You might have a very long family practice or a personal practice of a specific faith or tradition, and that's wonderful. And if so, that's exactly right here for spiritual rest. But it could also just mean taking in nature, allowing yourself to feel awe and wonder of the world, of the stars, of life, of your children's laughter. It also, spiritual rest can just mean getting connected to your values. As I said, maybe that's community service or being involved with organizations that are championing causes you really care about. That's a form of spiritual rest. So I want you to write down spiritual rest, and next to it, one thing that comes up for you of the things I mentioned that might be part of that. So my hope right now is that you have all 7 written down, and next to it, 1 or more ideas about the things that you could do in these areas. Okay, so this one makes me laugh because it says I started coloring to manage my stress and anxiety. And they're like, just, Rrr. So actually there is some research that shows just doing that can be very therapeutic. So if you want to color like that, go for it. Again, not wrong. And then the other part is actually there is studies that show this form behind, maybe is called a mandala. And there's actually studies that show if you're someone that's like, I can't meditate, or I don't like meditating, or it's not for me, there's research that says actually coloring a mandala, these circle forms, and there's lots of like coloring books for adults now, is the same as meditating. It actually helps us go into homeostasis, which is that relaxation response in the body. So that's another option for you if you're like, I'm not creative or I don't like meditating, which is something we're going to talk about. Get a coloring book. It's also absolutely valid and can help you get the same kind of relief and restorative practice that you might get from something else. Okay, so we're going to spend a moment here talking about breath, movement, and then we're actually going to do a meditation practice together. So the first is I'm going to talk about breath. So I know some people are like, I breathe all day long. This isn't a big deal. I don't need you to tell me about how to breathe. And yes, that's true. However, breathing is really interesting because it is one of those things that our bodies will do automatically without our awareness. And it's one of the things that we actually can cultivate and take control of and can dramatically impact our restoration. The other part that I like to say for men that I work with, I've worked with police officers and some other men that are like breathing, is that they teach it to Navy SEALs. So it's something that is actually really effective to help people. And there's lots of research behind it. So the breath I want to teach you today is really simple. And I'm going to ask you to do it where you are in this moment. And the breath is a 3 inhale through the nose and a 6 exhale through the mouth. So wherever you are right now, if it's comfortable for you to do this, I want you to just sit back in your chair, think about relaxing your shoulders, dropping your jaw. We're going to take a moment to really tap into how you're feeling, and then just gentle, 3 in through the nose, 6 out through the mouth. So I'm just going to count to myself and pay attention to the time. And I'm going to let you just keep doing that while I kind of tell you about the breath. So just keep doing the breath for a moment while you pay attention to how your body feels. It's 3 in through the nose, 6 out through the mouth. So the reason why this breath is really powerful is because this has been shown that just a minute of this type of breathing can help remove cortisol from the bloodstream. So this breath in particular activates what's called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. It touches everything in our body, including our lungs, our heart rate, our digestion system. And when we can regulate the vagus nerve, it's one of the quickest ways we can actually come back into homeostasis, or the balance point in the body. So whenever you want, you can gently open your eyes and come back to this moment with me. But I want you to also write that down for yourself as one of the tips, is this breath. 3 in through the nose, 6 out through the mouth. So some of the ways that people talking about how do we get these practices into our everyday life that I've worked with have included these into their lives is they'll put calendar reminders on their phone or on their computer to do the breath for a minute in between a meeting or something, and they'll just do the breath. They'll sit in their chair wherever they are. They'll do a minute of breathing. Maybe if you know that you're going to be heating up your lunch in a microwave or making a cup of coffee and you're waiting for your things to get warm, do it while you're waiting. That's perfectly timed. If you're waiting a minute or two for the food to heat up, there's a minute right there where you could be doing the breath and be conscious and tapping in, how am I feeling, and helping your body manage the cortisol levels that you're having. And this is the part that we talked about, little by little, a little becomes a lot, is finding little ways throughout your day to do these practices. So the second thing I wanted to mention is movement. There's so much research around how movement and being in the outdoors specifically sometimes is even as good as antidepressants. So if you're noticing that you or a loved one is really struggling with depression or anxiety, yes, they might need a professional help, and I encourage you to seek that out. Yes, they might need medicine. There's nothing wrong to feel ashamed about if that's the case. And I would say, make sure you're getting out for walks. Get out into nature as much as you can, because there is so much research on the power of nature to help our stress levels and on physical activity. So how does this look for you in your office, right? If you're like, I don't live by a park and I can't just get out, even just doing a little spurt of like jumping jacks or squats or a yoga pose or something can actually be really helpful to deal with those allostatic loads that we're talking about. Now, I know you might feel like that's silly, but honestly, there's a body of research that I studied during my Ph.D. called somatic experiencing. And really what they're saying, and the work is really powerful if you're interested in it, is that the mind and body is so connected that we can't privilege the mind, our ability to say, stop thinking that, or don't be stressed, over the body's need to actually let go of the energy that it holds, right? And so Dr. Peter Levine, who kind of pioneered this, uses the example of watching animals in nature, right? If two little ducks get in a fight and then they kind of go off their own ways, they kind of like shuttle the do their little feathers or whatever. Same idea with humans, this idea to like shake it off, right? To kind of like have a little bit of discharge from all the buildup. So next time you have a stressful meeting or a stressful interaction and you get a moment to yourself, I hope and pray that you will think, oh, I'm just going to do some jumping jacks real quick, or I'm just going to let my feet kind of like pretend like I'm running and pound out underneath my desk for a moment, because that actually can be very helpful, or just even shaking the body or moving. So that's my kind of pitch for movement. And then meditation. I know that everywhere you look now, there's practices and studies on meditation and mindfulness, and they're right and they're helpful, and it does do wonders. And we're going to do one together called loving kindness meditation. But before we do, one of the things I just want to mention as a hopeful kind of I hope it's hopeful for you, is that we know through neuroplasticity that the brain can change. So the brain changes throughout the course of our life. It doesn't stop changing. Anytime you learn something new, your brain changes. And so when we do meditation practice, actually what the research has shown is it actually changes the brain in a very effective way. And the loving kindness meditation we're going to do has been shown in as little as 10 minutes to change the brain and well-being and fighting chronic levels of exhaustion and pain, as well as improving our relationships with other people. And this is research from Stanford and other big universities, as little as 10 minutes a day. And then what they found after the study was completed is 15 months later, the improvement stayed. So what we're doing when we do meditative or mindful practices, and if you're also like, I don't do that, it's not me, there's so many different kinds. So I'm happy to answer those questions too at the end of the presentation, or you're welcome to reach out to me afterwards via email and I can help you find one that maybe works for you. But I can't say enough why that's so important. The other piece that I really want to mention that comes again out of research from Stanford is one of the most important things you can do for yourself is learn how to sit with discomfort. And mindfulness practices of any type is part of that. And what we're doing when we learn how to sit with discomfort is actually learning how to sit with ourselves. And why is that important to restorative practices? Because it's really everything. It's about being able to sit with our own feelings and have the capacity to choose something that's actually going to nourish us versus behaviors that are maybe soothing but not helpful. So why do I say that? Because sometimes if you notice, oh, I'm an emotional eater, or I drink more than I want to, or I scroll on Instagram forever and then I just feel empty, what that is actually soothing behavior. It's not conscious, it's unconscious soothing behavior. And so when you can sit with your discomfort and actually ask yourself, what do I need? You're going to get to the place where you actually can do something to help you meet the need versus just soothe the irritation or the discomfort. And the soothing will continue until we actually meet the need, because the soothing will never get to the place where the need is. So that is why sitting with our discomfort is so important. And it's part of why meditation practices are so helpful. So I could go on about that forever because it's a passion of mine, but I'll leave that there and actually invite you into an experience of this loving kindness meditation. So this meditation takes about 10 minutes. I'm going to walk you through it. So I just invite you again, if you're comfortable where you are, you feel safe, that you close your eyes and do the breathing that we did together, which is the 3 in through the nose, the 6 out through the mouth. If at any time that feels uncomfortable or too much or forced, just focus on breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. Listen to your body. Sometimes people say, oh, after a while, it makes me feel a little dizzy. If so, just let it go. Just focus on relaxing. And if you're in a place where like, I can't really do that, I'm at my desk at work, you can just listen. Or you can, lower your gaze and keep your eyes open if closing your eyes doesn't feel comfortable. So I'm going to invite you to do that now. And I'm just going to walk us through this loving kindness meditation. So get comfortable in your seat. Close your eyes if that's the choice you're making, or just lower your gaze. Begin to do the breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. As a gentle reminder, again, that was about a 3 inhale through the nose, about a 6 exhale through the mouth. And as you do that, we're going to actually also start by doing what's called a body scan. So a body scan is just a way to really notice how your body's feeling without judgment. So I'm going to ask you to start at the top of your head and just work your way down the front, back, and sides of your skull, just thinking about relaxing the muscles around the eyes, the jaw, then down your neck, shoulders, arms, forearms, wrists, and fingers. And then the front and back of the body, continuing down over the legs, knees, ankles, arches of the feet, toes, feet on the floor. So just notice how you feel in this moment, what's present for you. And as we begin this loving kindness meditation, I'm just going to ask you to cultivate within your own heart a sense of loving kindness. So what that means is just notice your natural capacity for joy or your natural desire to be happy. If you find this difficult, it's okay. Perhaps think about times you've shared with people you love, or a sense of being kind or generous, or maybe the way that a loved one's eyes look when you connect with them, or even a pet and the feeling you have. And as you allow that to grow, I want to invite you to imagine a younger version of yourself standing in front of you. I want you to then provide these loving, tender feelings towards this younger version of yourself. And as we do that, we are going to offer them some phrases. So just silently after me, repeat these phrases as if you're offering them to this younger version of yourself. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be held in loving kindness. May you feel connected and calm. May you accept yourself just as you are. May you be happy. May you know the natural joy of being alive. Then allow the image of that younger version of yourself to go. And now I'm going to ask you to bring to mind somebody that is very dear to you, that you love very much. I want you to imagine that they are standing in front of you now. And we are going to offer these phrases to them as well. So silently after me, repeat these phrases to them. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be held in loving kindness. May you feel my love now. May you accept yourself just as you are. May you be happy. May you know the natural joy of being alive. Allow the image of that person to go. And now I'm going to ask you to bring to mind someone that is neutral to you. So what I mean by that is maybe this is someone that you see on a regular basis, but you don't really know their personal story. You don't know much about them. It could be the mailman, it could be someone at the grocery store. But I want you to imagine that this person that you see regularly is standing in front of you now. And we're going to offer these phrases to them as well. So silently after me, repeat these words. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be held in loving kindness. May you feel my love now. May you accept yourself just as you are. May you be happy. May you know the natural joy of being alive. Now I'd like that image to go, and we're going to ask you now to bring to mind someone for whom you actually have a difficult relationship with. Now, if you need to, and it doesn't feel safe, whoever that person is, you can push them back. Just push the image back. Give yourself as enough space as you need between you and whoever this person is. And you also have the freedom to choose. If someone shows up and you're like, nope, not that one, just switch them out. Pick someone else. But pick someone for whom it's hard for you actually to have sympathetic feelings towards. Someone that you actually struggle to have compassion towards. I'd like you to pick that person. And we're going to offer them these same phrases as a way of acknowledging that they are a person that also suffers. They are a person that's also deserving of compassion. So repeat after me silently to this person. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be held in loving kindness. May you feel love now. May you accept yourself just as you are. May you be happy. May you know the natural joy of being alive. Now I'd like you to let that image go. And I'd like you to allow your awareness to expand in all directions to include yourself, the younger version of you, the dear one, the neutral person, the difficult person, and now all beings and all animals everywhere. And we are going to offer these phrases to them. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free of suffering. May all beings know the natural joy of being alive. And lastly, we're going to come back to your own beautiful heart. I'd like to invite you to put one or both hands over your own heart now. I want you to feel that connection to your own beautiful heart. Maybe you can even feel the beat of it, or maybe you can just notice the warmth of your hand or the comfort of the touch. And lastly, we're going to offer these phrases back now to your own beautiful heart. So silently repeat after me to yourself. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be held in loving kindness. May I feel love for myself now. May I accept myself just as I am. May I be happy. May I know the natural joy of being alive. So I'd like to invite you now to just take a moment to notice how you feel. Notice what's present. And just take another inhale through the nose for 3. Exhale through the mouth for 6. And whenever you're ready, I invite you to gently open your eyes and return to this moment with me. And I'd like you, before we even talk about anything, to just spend a moment jotting down whatever came up for you in that piece of paper that we're taking notes. So whatever, maybe it's a word, a thought, a feeling, an image, whatever stood out for you during that meditation practice. Doesn't have to even be a complete sentence, but just take a moment to make a note for yourself. You could write loving kindness meditation, something that you noticed. Even colors or images, sometimes people are like, I didn't really get much from it, but I kept feeling like I saw the color blue. It might not seem like it matters, but it actually does have meaning. So I invite you to notice those things and to honor them.
I'd like to chime in and even offer saying, like, if you noticed your temperature change with each person that you're visualizing, I think that would be a really good thing to note. And I do want to open it up to attendees and participants. I'll open it up to allow you to talk if you would like. You don't have to, don't feel pressure to, but if you would like to chime in and share some of like what you felt, then that would be great. So I'm going to click through the list and allow you to talk. And you can unmute yourself if you want to. And feel free to chime in. And if not, then that's just fine.
Yeah, and even if you're like, I didn't like it, that's okay too. Did anyone notice if it was particularly difficult to offer those sayings to the person that was hard for them? Or maybe even hard to offer them to yourself. Sometimes people notice the hardest person to offer loving kindness to was me. I really struggled with saying I love myself, I accept myself. That's okay too.
That's definitely where I struggled. I don't know if my video is on, but that's definitely where I struggled. Just kind of offering that to myself is always my biggest hurdle and something I'm really trying to work on.
Yeah, it's beautiful and courageous of you to be able to say that. So you're not alone. Thank you for sharing that. That is one that people really notice is hard. And, sometimes what I have found to be helpful is when we notice negative self-talk towards ourselves, right? This is sometimes how that will manifest, is just even creating the awareness of, would I say this to one of my children, or would I say this to someone I loved? And typically the answer is no. And so then asking yourself, okay, if I wouldn't say this to someone else, then maybe it's time I stop saying it to myself. And that's hard, but the very first step is just noticing, right? So even your courage to notice, wow, that was the hardest one for me, is beautiful. And I want to encourage you that, because, as I mentioned, neuroplasticity, those habits of thoughts are actually neural networks in the brain, meaning there are pathways that we've created over time of internalized stories from culture or ourself that make that our default mode, right? But through repeated effort of noticing and then changing it, we actually have the capacity through neuroplasticity to change our brain and what our default mode is. And one of the visuals I like to offer is, think about it like a path in the woods. So a path in the woods that's really been worn all the time is really easy. You'll think, oh, that's the path I take, right? But the moment someone stops taking that path, because maybe they think, oh, it's not safe anymore, they close it off, nobody takes it for a long time, and they make a new path, eventually that path will overgrow. There will always be, if you dug up all the bushes, a little bit of the path left, right? But you would never think to take it on a hike if you saw it's blocked off and the arrow says this way, this way, this way, and that's the way you're going now, right? And that's exactly what happens in the brain. Those neural networks will remain, but they'll become weaker over time, and those new strong ones will become your default. So be encouraged that a practice like this actually has been shown to increase our well-being for ourselves, and also our empathy towards other people. And self-compassion is one of the greatest things that you can do for yourself. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. Does anyone else want to share anything they notice? Okay. Well, thanks for trusting me. I know sometimes too, if you've never done meditation practices before, to just like dive in and close your eyes and be like, here we go on the journey. I'm on the roller coaster. I appreciate your trust. And there's also a lot of great options, by the way, for this specific loving kindness meditation. If you're someone that has a spiritual or religious tradition, there are ones that use the word God, if that would feel better for you, or there's ones like this one that's more secular. So there's a lot of options, and they've been researched by a lot of universities. So even different universities put out this specific, if you look for like mindfulness, or you can email me and I can send you links for that too. I'm happy to do that afterwards. Okay, so why and how are restorative practices helpful if we want to be heart-centered leaders? So when I was invited to meet with you guys today, one of the things that I was encouraged to also talk about is, okay, so this is great for ourselves, but then how does it relate to how we're leaders in our lives or of our families or in our communities? And one of the things I want to mention, and this really came from the vulnerable and brave share that we had, is that being connected to how we're doing and how we're feeling and restoring ourselves is actually going to give us the capacity to be heart-centered. So we're going to kind of unpack the layers of what I mean by that right now. Okay, so when we started, we talked about stress, and we talked about how stress and stress levels shut us down, make us less creative, make us kind of more self-protective and disconnect us, right? So the other part is, think about any time you've been really afraid. You probably haven't been like, I want to talk about my most intimate, vulnerable feelings right now, or I want to be vulnerable, right? When you're in a stress response and you're feeling under some kind of threat, any kind, right? It could be a deadline that's creating stress response. You're not going to want to be vulnerable. That's going to be like the last thing you're thinking about. And so why restorative practices are important is because it manages our overall stress load. And when we have that managed, we then have the capacity to actually feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And vulnerability is one of the most important things that you need to be a heart-centered leader. The other part that we were just talking about prior, about the self-compassion piece, is that actually we need that ability to be able to show up for other people. So one of the things that meditation we just did actually helps increase is empathy. So if you're going to be a heart-centered leader, one of the things we need to actively stand in is empathy. But if you're in a stress response, it's going to be really hard to want to feel what other people are feeling or connect with them in that way. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but we're not moving on from this topic. So these are the 5 things that are needed to really be a heart-centered leader. An active listener. So active listening goes down if you're stressed, right? So why are restorative practices important? Because if you're stressed out, you're going to miss the opportunity to really hear someone. You might already be into what your response is versus what they're actually saying. The other part is, if you're stressed, oftentimes what happens is we kind of pop up out of the body sometimes. We're in our heads a lot, right? And part of empathy is actually feeling what other people feel. So that means you have to be attuned to what is happening in your body to actually have a full experience of empathy so that you can notice what you're experiencing in the moment. That's part of active listening. The other part is this focus on relationships and connections. So this idea of process and not product, right? The idea of knowing the importance of being connected. And as we talked about before, if you're really stressed out, you're not going to really be in a place where that's the focus. There's going to be other things that feel more important than making the time and space to sit with people, right? To really connect. It's going to be, what's my to-do list, not what's needed in this moment. Maybe this person needs me to sit here with them for a minute. Maybe that's actually going to be the most important thing I do, is focus on the health of this relationship or employee or family member or whatever it is, right? The next is be truthful and authentic. So this is directly tied to stress, because we will self-protect. This comes back to the perfectionism piece. We will hide our authentic selves if we're stressed. And perfectionism it's a default way that we try to deal with stress, right? If I'm perfect, perfectionism is another way of saying if I control everything and make it perfect, then I won't be rejected or have to deal with blame or shame or any of those feelings. But when perfectionism is driving, as Brene Brown says, shame is in the front seat. So just to notice that oftentimes if we aren't finding that we can be authentic or truthful, it might be because we're afraid. We might be in a stress response that's causing us to use other mechanisms to try to control what's happening and feel more stable. So practicing empathy, we talked about that as one of the important parts and why it's connected to these restorative practices. And then lastly, I just want to mention the showing up and allowing yourself to be seen and vulnerable. So again, that really does connect back to this idea of if we're not doing these restorative practices, we're not going to want to be seen and vulnerable. We're going to have our armor on. So these things are really important for you to think about in your own life. Even if you're leading a family, these will absolutely have an impact on how you show up as a parent, as a person, or if you don't have kids, but you have a partner or you have family members that you're in relationship with or friendship, these things apply to that as well. So you don't have to have a title to have these be important to how you're showing up. So Brene Brown, maybe you know her, maybe you don't, but if you haven't explored her work is amazing and has inspired me definitely, and also my dissertation that I wrote. But she says, leading from the heart. So I wanted to read this quote. She says, one of the key learnings emerging from our leadership study that took my breath away, leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. While leader, heal thyself. So what she's saying here, which is hopefully something that's come across too in our time together, is we can either make the time to do restorative practices of checking in with ourselves and other people, take the moment, or we can let those feelings kind of fester under the surface, which are those fears, and it will come out sideways in unproductive behavior. Now that could mean blocks in our creativity or production. It could mean blocks in our relationships. It could mean those self-soothing behaviors we talked about of eating or watching TV or scrolling, right? All of those are unproductive. But it also happens if you have people you're working with or your children, if you notice they're kind of having unproductive behaviors, to start to train yourself. I wonder what's happening underneath that behavior. The behavior is distracting, but what's the need? What might be happening? And to do that with yourself, okay, I'm noticing my behavior is a little like, oh, today, but ask yourself, what might be the need underneath that? And can I take a few minutes to invest in paying attention to what's happening so that I can actually have behavior that aligns with my values and goals? So as a leader too, the self-awareness piece is very, very important. So another tip, here we go with how practically to do this. So specific practices for cultivating heart-centered living and leading. So what the research shows, and this is what I learned through my training at Yale actually, was the importance of gratitude. Now, this might be something like, I know, gratitude journal, everyone's been talking about that for 25 years. Yeah, you're right. So I just want to give you some quick tips. I'm not going to rewrite the book, it's already been written, but on what it actually means to have a gratitude practice. So having general gratitude is great, but get your pen and paper ready because I'm going to give you some specific prompts right now that I'd like you to do. So what the research has shown is that it's great to think about it, but what actually makes it helpful is if you write it down. That's actually what's the difference. So right now, with your piece of paper, I want you to write gratitude and just name 3 things you're grateful for. And they could be really simple. If you're having a hard time thinking about it, it could be my legs work and I can walk to the bathroom on my own, or I see or I taste. Sometimes I ask people, think about what your body does on a regular basis, how hard your heart works to circulate the blood through your body every day. Like, if you're having a hard time thinking of things, get real basic. Okay, so that's the first thing. The other thing about gratitude that I wanted to say is I want you to take a moment right now to close your eyes once you've written down your 3 things. And I want you to spend just a moment thinking about somebody in your life that you're grateful for. Somebody that maybe has helped you, believed in you, loved you. I want you to really pull them up in your mind. And I want you to notice how you're feeling as you do that. And as if you could see them, I want you to just express from your heart to their heart how you feel about what they've done for you, or who they've been to you, what they've taught you. I want you to imagine how grateful they must be to be thought of this way. I want you just to notice again how your body feels as you bring up this sense of gratitude for this person. So when you're ready, I invite you just to open your eyes again and write down that person's name, maybe something you noticed. And as you do that, I'm just going to share a bit more about what we just did and why it's important. So what the research shows in terms of this gratitude piece is another very effective way to make gratitude actually help you be heart-centered and to make you feel restored, is to write letters of gratitude to people that you love. So what the research showed is that when people did this, they actually took the time to write a letter and send it, that not only the person that wrote the letter, but the recipient of the letter got a bump in their well-being, both on physical and emotional scales, and it lasted 15 months after the fact. So this idea of expressing gratitude is so important. It's life-giving. And to find ways to do that. A last kind of tip I like to offer people around gratitude and how to make it an everyday part of your life is to keep Post-it notes or paper, little strips of paper. And when you do your practice of writing 3 things down, or you can make it as complicated or as simple as you want, write it down on the piece of paper and then put it in a jar or container that you love and keep it somewhere. And you can do this as a family or with your loved ones if you want. They can add things to the jar. And then when you notice you're having a tough day, or somebody that you love in your family or your circle who's been adding to the jar with you is having a tough day, go back to the jar and pull out pieces one at a time and read over them. So when we're having moments where it's hard to remember what we're grateful for, having this kind of jar of the gratitude pieces that we've collected can be very helpful. So that's another piece I wanted to mention around the gratitude. Okay, so what I wanted to say now, and I know we're kind of getting towards the end of time, so we're just going to go through some of these last slides, is what the research says about how to build a new habit. So it's great to talk about all these things, for me to give you specific tips, ideas, a plethora of options of how to do restorative practices, but how do you actually build them? So the reason I have these kind of cutie images is because the technique is actually called stacking, and it comes from Stanford. And the idea here is that how you build a new habit, what the research repeatedly shows us is you stack it on top of a habit you're already doing. So what does that mean and what does that look like? You know how we talked about earlier with the breath, if you're making your coffee in the morning, do the breathing while you're waiting, that's a stacking behavior. So there's lots of different ways to do this, but think about it for yourself. What are things you're already doing all the time, nonstop? It's part of your daily ritual. Whatever it is, think about stacking next to it one of these restoration practices. So maybe it's the gratitude journal, maybe it's the breathing, maybe it's movement, whatever it is, pick one, keep it small, pick one and stack it next to something that you're already doing. The other part is really important too. It's called subjective insertion. This also is from research out of Stanford. And what it means is when you've done it, when you actually stacked the thing next to the thing, right? So you go tomorrow morning, or maybe even this afternoon after the call, you start right away, you go to make your lunch. It's going to be around lunchtime. You're waiting and you're like, oh yeah, Brooke said, do the breathing. Here I go. And you're doing it. So, and you do it for a minute or whatever it is. While you're doing it, once you finish, the moment you finish, I want you to have a moment of celebration. And I know this might sound silly, but if it's like a happy dance, do a happy dance. If it's like, I did it, I'm on my way, a little thing you say to yourself silently, whatever it is. But the reason why this is important, the subjective insertion piece, is because it creates dopamine in the brain. So dopamine in the brain is our reward chemical. It's also the part that helps us with motivation and focus. So as silly as it is, I'm sure for those of you with kids, or maybe even for those of you that have coworkers, you say it to them all the time, good job, you did awesome, but do you say it to yourself when you do something that's good for yourself? And if not, now's the time to start, because it actually does really help us not only start to build a new habit, but to stick with it. So also, this is really important if you had New Year's resolutions and you're like, oh man, halfway through January and I'm not doing them. It's okay, start over and start with these techniques. If it was you wanted to start walking or running, start by just putting your shoes by the front door. Don't even put them on and say, I did it. Look at me, I'm on my way. That's it for the first day. Next day, you put your shoes on. Don't open the door, just put them on. Say, yeah, I'm on my way. Look at me, I'm doing it, right? Next day, you put them on, you walk outside, take a couple steps, come home if you need to, fine. Keep doing it and celebrating all along the way. And what you're doing is you're continuing to reward yourself. You're stacking it by taking little steps, celebrating them, and eventually, little by little, a little becomes a lot. You'll be on your way. So try that if you're wondering how do I, and this really applies to any habit, by the way. So it's just a good tip to know about habits. Okay, so I wanted to provide some additional resources. Additionally, as I said, you're welcome to email me afterwards. I think on the last slide, I have my contact information, but a few for what we are specifically talking about today. The 7 restorative habits come from the first resource there. She's a physician and an author and researcher. She has a book called Sacred Rest. So that's one I wanted to mention to you. There's also a really wonderful Harvard Business Review article that I send to all the clients I work with that actually specifically talks about COVID and a lot of kind of reviews, a lot of the things we kind of addressed here about allostatic load and stress in the mind and body. It's called Coping with Fatigue, Fear, and Panic During a Crisis. It's really validating, but also very informative. So if you don't check out the Harvard Business Review, and it's, even though I'm associated through their coaching institute, it's not a plug, it's just they have really good information, and you get a number of free articles ongoing. So if you don't look at them as a resource, they actually have some great stuff. Thrive community, if you don't know about this, it's a wonderful community that's focused on well-being and helping people work without burnout. And there's lots of great things that you can learn through their free programs, even their Instagram account or articles and offerings that they have. Dr. Brene Brown, as I mentioned, she has a wonderful podcast that covers all kinds of things, but also a specific one around leadership, if you're more interested in that topic. I wanted to mention a few of her books, although she has many: Daring Greatly, Dare to Lead, Braving the Wilderness, and Gifts of Imperfection. Those are just a few of them, but she has lots. And also a very famous TED Talk, which I'm sure you know, but if you don't, check it out. It's very good and talks about shame and vulnerability. And also a Netflix special that's very good called Call to Courage. And then lastly, another book that comes from the publishing of Harvard Business Review, the author's names are there, it's called Unleash. And that's more about leading with our whole hearts and leading to empower people around us. I could go on because I love research. Obviously, my work is trying to marry together the research and the practical applications. So maybe we'll get to that in questions, but also, as I said, just feel free to reach out to me afterwards. This is my contact information and website. As you would see on my website, I do coaching and consulting individually with people, also with companies. I also write curriculum or educational resources for different companies sometimes. So there's a lot of different ways that I can help bring these kinds of teachings to you or your community. And I just want to thank you again for your time. I really believe time is valuable. It's not easy to come by, especially when we're all so busy. And so I appreciate you taking the time. And I also want to congratulate you, because making the time for yourself is not always easy. And today, even if you only got half of this or some of it, you prioritized your own needs. And that's one of the biggest parts of restorative practices. It's not getting so selfish that we don't show up for others, but it's knowing that we belong in that circle and we get to show up for ourselves. So thank you for doing that for yourself. And thank you for showing up today. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Brooke. It's amazing to have you here. I can just feel my stress levels in the before and after have just like been cut in half. And I have questions to ask, but I'm really curious to hear from the community. So let's just open up the floor now. If there's anyone, and questions, comments, or feedback as well. You know, if there's anything that you feel compared to share. And then we've pulled up this last poll question to see how everybody's feeling at the end of the session as well. So go ahead and answer that and chime in if you have anything to share.
Yeah, you guys were all pretty like up anyways at the beginning. You're a good feeling group, so maybe you stayed the same, but maybe there was some improvement.
Mm-hmm.
We got a couple more to come in. But go ahead and feel free to click your unmute button if you have a question you would like to ask while we're waiting for the poll to end.
Yeah, even a question or a comment if there's one thing in particular that stood out for you as a practice that you think you want to try, or something that maybe you had more questions about as one of the practices or any of the resources. Please feel free to offer any feedback. Anything's welcome.
I just really loved the visual of the paths in the woods, and when you stop taking a path, how it's still there, but it grows back. Mm-hmm. That was really, I just loved that visual, and just really spoke to me. So I just thank you, because I wrote that down, and I really liked that visual.
Good. Yeah, I hope it's encouraging to you too, because I know sometimes when any of us try to change, we can get so focused on what hasn't changed yet, even while we're in the midst of the change. And as you said, it just takes some time, but it can be very powerful and it's possible. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think that combined with just the practice of taking the time to do the meditation, because I know a lot of times I tell myself like, oh, yeah, I'm good. But I don't ever take the time to literally walk down that path and walk through a meditation like that, and just to, do that and feel the difference is huge. And so knowing that practice is truly opening neural pathways that I'm not usually actually walking down. I feel like I am, but I'm not actually doing it is great.
Yeah, thank you for that. I saw we got some 10s in the, which we didn't have before, so yay. Some people went to 10s. I appreciate that you said that. And also, I just want to say that neural pathways, like you said, through the meditation are new habits. So accompanied with that, and I'm so grateful you said that because it's triggered in my mind to say this piece, is that a lot of where the neuroplasticity actually happens is in our sleep. So that's kind of, if you think about it, you probably know that that's also where your body heals, right? So the reason I say that is because you can be doing the meditation during the day, working really hard on your new habits and doing awesome. But if you're not getting enough sleep at night, or you're not getting good sleep, it's going to be really hard for you to get new habits or new neural pathways in your brain. So with everything you do during your waking hours, really, really prioritize getting good rest at night so that your brain can do that rewiring, because they go hand in hand. But also, and thank you for your comment, there are so many great apps now for meditation. If you haven't explored ones, I mean, there are ones for specific spiritual traditions. There's just general ones. There's ones that will, read you a story, walk you through, I mean, all of them. And there's so many free ones too. So find one that works for you. I always say with all the tools I offer to people, it might be a good tool. It might be well-researched. It might have a lot of evidence behind it. But if you don't like it, or if it doesn't feel good to you, or if it doesn't resonate with you, it's not going to be effective. So what's most important is being your authentic self with these practices and finding what works for you. So thanks for your comment.
I had a question for you, Brooke, because I think, a lot of times it's easier to like hit the reset button or reach for these practices after, something has kind of gone on. But we also have these kind of like moments that we're in anticipation of. Maybe it's like a big meeting or a presentation, or something that we're kind of like hyping ourselves up for, whether it's good or bad. And I'm just wondering like how these practices apply to the idea of getting grounded. A lot of people talk about, oh, it's really important to kind of ground yourself before going into something that you're really, energetically preparing for. So could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Great question. So when we are doing that kind of anticipatory thinking about something coming up, right, we might be nervous about it and having anxious thoughts, right? Or we might just be having lots of thoughts about it. Maybe they're not necessarily anxious in nature. Part of what we're doing actually is we're causing ourselves to be in that fight, flight, freeze response I talked about, because we're creating cortisol in the body. Stress is just cortisol, right? So you're right. One of the most important things to do is become present and grounded again. So taking those deep breaths that I said that regulate the vagus nerve, that's one of the quickest ways to get yourself to come back into the present moment. It also requires you to be conscious, right? You're doing a counting, which helps our minds stop from like really going into the future. The other part is that it's really important, that is a whole nother topic presentation on itself, that I work with a lot of people around, is starting to notice your thoughts, because our thoughts are actually powerful. And this is not airy fairy, positive thinking. And I'm definitely not somebody that believes in what I call spiritual bypassing, where you just like visualize your way out of it. And I think visualization is very powerful, and there's a lot of research behind it, and it's a good tool, but it's both and. You need to feel your feelings and then bring along the tools. So what would that look like in practice? You have a meeting that's coming up that you're really afraid of, or you're kind of anxious about. Acknowledge it. I feel anxious. Okay, I'm scared. Okay, I'm scared. I feel that, right? So that's the very first step, is not just pretending, like trying to talk yourself out of it. The next would be notice the story you're telling yourself. Now, Brene Brown talks about this a lot in her work, and I think it's very powerful for any of us to think about it. This could be around work, around relationships, around anything. When you notice that you're getting stressed, maybe you feel it first in your body and you're starting to get anxious or worked up, right away do the breath, get yourself back in your body, notice your feet on the floor, and then ask yourself, what is the story I'm telling myself? So what I mean by that is, it could be, if it's like, we'll go with the meeting one, it could be, I'm not smart enough. They're going to know that I'm a fake. They're going to know that I'm an imposter. Imposter syndrome is a real big thing for a lot of people. They're going to find out that I'm not, what they think I am, or they're not going to love me. They're going to reject me. They're going to say that, whatever it is, right? There's lots of variations of this story. So notice the story. And then what I say is regroup. Okay, is the story you're telling yourself helpful? Is it loving? Would you say that to someone else? If not, and this is very helpful, write down the specific sentence. Don't be afraid of it, write it down. If the sentence says, I'm going to fail, okay, write it down. And then ask yourself, okay, is that really true? And even if it is, what else could I say to myself? Maybe is I can do this afraid. I've done other things where I was afraid and it worked out. Or I have support of the people that love me. And it'd be great if they like this presentation, but at the end of the day, I know I'm okay. I know I'm smart. I know my heart's in the right place. That's a really important one. Sometimes people, get focused on the applause instead of knowing like, oh, if I'm connected to my values, right? At the very beginning of the presentation, we talked about getting connected to your value. If you're connected to your values, the research shows that you will have higher levels of well-being and fulfillment in your work. Because if it's a success, great. If it's not, if you've done it with your whole heart and you've shown up and you're connected to your values, you'll walk away feeling good. I did my best. I really did. I stayed connected to what I believe in. I gave it my best. And maybe I'm disappointed, but I can handle the disappointment. I didn't self-abandon my own values in this. So focusing on those kinds of things by first asking yourself, what's the story I'm telling myself, can be very, very powerful. The breathing techniques. And there's other ways. Does that answer your question, or would you like to ask a follow-up question?
No, that was super, super helpful.
Okay.
And I think too, the other thing that comes to mind is like making sure that we're creating the space to do that is the big thing that I've got to get better about. So I really appreciate the idea of just, blocking it into the calendar. Do I have 15 minutes before that meeting where I can do that practice so that, I can let those things go. So that's, hugely helpful.
Yeah. And even if you only have a couple minutes, honestly, when I'm working with clients or, doing things like this and I have back-to-backs, I will purposely schedule in, 10 minutes in between, or sometimes more, depending on what I've had, leading up to that, where I know I'm going to be able to take care of my physical needs, meaning get a drink of water, or, whatever I need to do, and also have enough time to actually check in with myself and clear my own energy and think about how am I feeling, what's on my heart. I am someone that practices prayer, so I might do a prayer and a breath. And it's a way for me to show up for myself, but it's also a way of me saying, I honor the time that this person is giving me. So I want to show up for myself first so that I can really show up for them. And if I'm distracted or running a million miles an hour about what I was just doing or what came before this moment, and I haven't taken a moment to arrive, I'm not actually going to be present for this person. And so sometimes we think, oh, I can't do that, or it's selfish, but this is the piece that I was talking about too, the story you're telling yourself. You tell yourself I don't have time, or it's selfish, or these things are more important, but really realizing how valuable it is to actually schedule that in and show up for yourself so that you really can show up fully for other people.
I love that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Any other questions or comments or observations?
I mean, my main comment was when we were doing the meditation together was I did notice a change in temperature as we were going through the individuals, and how even how I felt in my whole body about the person, like my younger self, and then that person that I love deeply, which is my son, and then you go down the different other people, and it was just interesting to feel how warm my body was for somebody, when you're visualizing that person that you love so much and you want them to have all these great things, and then it did change as you get a little bit more disconnected. That was just an interesting thing to notice about my body through that meditation.
Yeah, beautiful awareness that you had that awareness, and it is really true. There's actually research that's been done on that, and there was an article, I think actually out of Harvard too, that points this out, that they do scans of the body as the body is feeling different emotions, and the body does create different body temperatures, and you can see it on a scan depending on just what we're thinking of, right? What we're interfacing with. And this is an important and powerful thing to think about, is that the brain doesn't necessarily distinguish between our imagination or what's actually happening. So that's why visualizations or meditations are so powerful, is because it isn't really distinguishing. I mean, it is on some level, right? You're like, oh, if I imagine a tiger, I know it's not really here. But if you close your eyes and you put yourself there, the neurochemicals in your brain and the neural networks in your brain are responding. When I said imagine that person in front of you, they start to respond as if that person is in front of you. So absolutely, your body will respond to that, right? It's also another reason why, again, it's so important to think about thoughts about self-compassion or judgment, because those are thoughts of judgment towards ourselves are actually creating a stress response in our body. And there's been research that links that to higher levels of inflammation. So when we talk about like how important it is to honor ourselves, love ourselves, be kind to ourselves, we're not just, trying to be, the hippies over here being like, feel your feelings. We're actually doing something very powerful, which is changing the biochemistry of our body. And that actually is very powerful too for how we show up. When I used to work as a therapist and not as a coach or consultant, I always thought about this one quote that really moved my life. And it was, who you are speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you're saying. And that was really powerful to me, both from a physiological and psychological level, but also from deeper levels. What the quote is saying is how you hold yourself, how your body is feeling is actually communicating much more than what your words are saying. And that is true, actually, from the standpoint of mirror neurons in the brain and how our bodies communicate without us actually speaking to each other. It's also true about how we can shift the energy in a room. And I'm sure all of us have experienced this. You walk into a room and you're like, whoa, what's that person putting off, right? Like you can feel it before they even open their mouth. Or you walk in and you're like, oh man, that person's really hurting. I can sense that something's not okay, right? So you're experiencing this all the time. It's just how attuned are we to it? Like you were saying, Julian, your ability to really like notice, oh wow, I was really having a physical reaction to even these ideas of these people. So really powerful. Thanks for sharing.
I noticed something funny. The individual who I had a hard time feeling compassion for is not at all who I would have expected. And I would say lately it's been my husband, just because I feel like I have a lot on my plate. And, but so it was really interesting for me that I was like, I really need to have more compassion for him. Just in that general, like, I feel like I don't have much compassion for myself right now, just with everything going on, but then also to like acknowledge that I'm not really giving him the compassion he deserves. I thought it was going to be somebody else or other people, but like really it felt right to be like, that's who I need to give that to.
So beautiful. Thank you for your share. Again, like very vulnerable and courageous, but also relatable, I'm sure, for many of us. Or, is that sometimes it is hard. And like you said so beautifully, when we're not giving it to ourselves, it's really hard to give it to other people. So that's true of everything, right? If we're not loving ourselves, if we're not being kind to ourselves, if we're judging ourselves, it's really hard to give that non-judgmental self to other people if we're actually being that hard on ourselves, right? And then the other piece that you said, I think is really beautiful too, this idea and noticing when I'm stressed and feeling overburdened and like there's too much on my plate, it's really hard not to get into anger or resentment or feelings of blame or shame or guilt towards other people. And that's really relatable. Brene Brown actually has a really wonderful article on blame, which comes up a lot of times in relationships, either our private relationships or just work relationships. But how powerful it can be to kind of pause and cultivate empathy and compassion there, and even think, okay, this is the story I'm telling myself, right? Which might be they're not helping or they're not showing up or they're not doing their fair share. And to just pause for a moment and think, okay, what might another story be? Might they also be stressed? Might they also be hurting? Might they also be overwhelmed and not able to tell me because maybe they don't feel like they can be vulnerable, right? And this is actually a powerful thing to try depending on your relationships and the safety in your relationships. But even just to, when you're having a conversation with someone you love and there's maybe a moment of conflict, to kind of start the conversation by saying, the story I'm telling myself about this situation is fill in the blank, right? The story I'm telling myself is that you don't love me and so you're not doing your fair share around the house. Or maybe you wouldn't say it that way, actually, because nonviolent communication says don't use blaming words. So we wouldn't, not doing your fair share. Maybe it's the story I'm telling myself is you don't love me or you don't care. And so I'm having to do so much to kind of keep us together, and ask, what's the story you're telling yourself? Can you tell me? Can you share with me so I can learn from you? But that can be just powerful, or even just this practice can be very powerful to help us shift without even needing to have the conversation. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, everyone, for these fearless shares. They're so phenomenal, and I think this is just, you know, the beginning of us connecting as a community and being vulnerable with each other. But that's, you know, the purpose of this space long term is to give us a place to have these kinds of conversations. And Brooke, I just want to give you a big thank you for being our fearless practitioner today and sharing with us all of these important practices. I want to wrap us up now, but I also want to remind everyone that this is a resource that we can continue to come back to. So we are going to take this beautiful recording and put it into everybody's member experience so that they can revisit these things over time. And I deeply, deeply encourage you that if Brooke is somebody that you want to stay connected to reach out to her and explore her work further, because it has been such a gift to all of us today. So thank you so much, Brooke. I really appreciate it. And thank you all, and wishing you a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.